A brilliant self-made president, a country gleaming with promise, and a single crazed gunman who brings it all to a tragic end. Stay tuned. I'm Matthew Sherwood, and welcome to Factual America. We've seen the story before. It's the story of Lincoln, of JFK, and it's playing out on Netflix now in a series called Death by Lightning, which has a long-forgotten president, James A. Garfield of all people, trending on social media. The dramatic story about a lone gunman, another Lee Harvey Oswald or John Wilkes Booth, makes for riveting television. But the truth? The truth is never that simple. The film about a president and his assassin largely papers over one of the biggest political scandals of the 19th century. It's a story that ignores the ruthless political war that had President James A. Garfield marked for death long before a bullet ever touched him. The shooting was just the last move in a much bigger, dirtier game. The real story isn't about one madman. It's about a war for the soul of America, a phrase we hear in our own politics today. And this is the truth that gets left out, even after 3 hours. To really get why Garfield was murdered, you can't just start in 1881. You have to go further back. You have to understand the world he was living in. Some call it the Gilded Age, which sounds glamorous, but the name from a Mark Twain novel was a brutal joke. It described a society that was shiny on the surface, but underneath it was deeply, fundamentally rotten. And one engine of all that rot was something called the spoils system. A simple and brutal idea. When you win an election, you get the spoils. It's the kind of thing we complain about today when we talk about the swamp. A new president could hand out tens of thousands of government jobs. Postmaster, customs collector, you name it. These jobs weren't given out based on qualifications. They were rewards for political loyalty. Your job wasn't to serve the public. It was to serve the party. They'd even assess your salary, a polite way of saying they took a mandatory cut to give back to the party bosses who got you the job. This system turned Washington, D.C. into a war zone for two tribes inside the Republican Party. Sound familiar? On one side, you had the stalwarts, led by the larger-than-life New York Senator Roscoe Conkling. The stalwarts were the old guard. They didn't see the spoils system as corrupt. To them, it was just how politics worked. They demanded absolute party loyalty and controlled the powerful machines that handed out jobs. On the other side were the half-breeds, led by Conkling's biggest rival, Senator James G. Blaine of Maine. The half-breeds weren't saints, but they saw the system was broken. They pushed for civil service reform, where jobs would be based on merit, not connections. The name half-breed was an insult from the stalwarts, basically calling them half-Republican, not unlike the party purity tests we see in modern American politics. This wasn't just a friendly debate. This was a Cold War fought over money and power, eerily similar to the intra-party feuds that define our political landscape today. And in 1880, a dark horse candidate named James A. Garfield got thrown right into the middle of it. He only won the nomination on the 36th ballot because neither side could agree on anyone else. To keep the stalwarts happy, the party selected one of Conkling's top guys, Chester A. Arthur, as its vice presidential candidate. It was a Frankenstein's monster of a ticket, designed to hold the party together, but it put two enemy camps inside the same White House. From day one, Garfield wasn't just the president. He was a general in a war he never even wanted. James A. Garfield was an incredible guy. Born into poverty in a log cabin, he became a scholar, a Civil War general, and a 9-term congressman. He knew exactly how corrupt the system was that he was now supposed to lead. He once complained that congressmen spent a third of their time just handing out jobs instead of governing. He knew the system was a cancer. And as president, he decided to cut it out. His first big move was to go right after Roscoe Conkling. The most powerful job to hand out was the collector of the Port of New York. It controlled thousands of jobs and millions in revenue for the federal government. It was the crown jewel of Conkling's empire, and he thought it was his right to choose who ran it. Garfield wasn't having it. In a huge power play, he nominated his own guy, a well-known reformer, directly challenging Conkling's power. It was a declaration of war. Conkling was furious. He saw it as a personal betrayal. He and his fellow New York senator tried to block the nomination, threatening and filibustering. But Garfield wouldn't back down. He rallied public support and the half-breeds to his side. In a moment of incredible arrogance, Conkling and his colleague resigned from the Senate. They thought the New York legislature would immediately re-elect them, humiliating Garfield and proving their power. This is back when legislatures selected the senators, not the public. But that gamble backfired hard. The legislature said no and confirmed Garfield's choice instead. Garfield had won. He broke the most powerful political boss in America. He'd struck a fatal blow against the spoils system and was ready to drain the swamp. It was the greatest political victory of his presidency, and it signed his death warrant. Because while all this was happening, a man named Charles Guiteau was watching. Guiteau was a failed everything, a failed lawyer, a failed preacher, a failed politician. He was a delusional narcissist who wrote a rambling speech for Garfield and convinced himself he was the reason Garfield won. So, he thought he was owed a big reward, like a diplomatic post in Paris. Guiteau hung around the White House for months, pestering Garfield for a job. Guiteau was a hardcore stalwart. He believed in the spoil system. He thought he'd worked for the party, so where was his spoil? When he was rejected, his delusion turned to rage. In his twisted mind, fed by the era's toxic political rhetoric, Garfield's fight against Conkling was treason. He thought Garfield was destroying the party, and if Garfield were gone, the stalwart Vice President Chester A. Arthur would take over. The spoils system would be safe, and guys like him would get what they deserved. He decided the president had to be removed. On July 2nd, 1881, Guiteau caught up to President Garfield at a Washington, D.C. train station. The president had no security detail, just walking arm in arm with his Secretary of State, Blaine. Guiteau walked right up behind him and fired 2 shots from a .44 caliber revolver, a gun he picked because he thought it would look impressive in a museum. One bullet grazed Garfield's arm. The other lodged in his back, behind his pancreas. Now this is where the simple story usually ends. The madman has his moment. But just like the JFK assassination, the simple story of a lone gunman is where the real questions begin. The bullet didn't kill James Garfield. His doctors actually did. What followed was a 79-day nightmare of medical malpractice. Within minutes, a dozen doctors swarmed the president. Back then, most American doctors thought the germ theory coming out of Europe was nonsense. So, one after another, doctors stuck their unsterilized fingers and dirty tools into the president's wound, searching for the bullet. They turned a survivable wound into a septic disaster. One doctor even punctured Garfield's liver during an exam. The physician in charge, Dr. D. Willard Bliss, was arrogant and dismissed modern antiseptic practices. He insisted on probing the wound again and again, spreading the infection deeper into Garfield's body. They tried to help the feverish president by feeding him heavy meals and alcohol to keep his strength up. As Garfield wasted away from a massive infection, his weight dropping from 210 to just 130 pounds, Alexander Graham Bell, the inventor of the telephone, brought a primitive metal detector he had invented to find the bullet. But the attempt failed, not because the machine didn't work, but because Dr. Bliss was so convinced he knew where the bullet was, he would only let Bell scan the wrong side of Garfield's body. An autopsy later showed the bullet was on the left side, and that the metal bed springs Garfield was lying on probably interfered with the machine anyway. For 79 agonizing days, the president wasn't dying from a gunshot. He was dying from a raging infection caused by the men who were supposed to save him. His body gave out on September 19th, 1881. In a grimly ironic twist, Charles Guiteau himself later argued at his trial, "I deny the killing, if your honor please. We admit the shooting." He claimed it was the doctors who really killed Garfield, and technically, he was right. So why do we, in popular culture like Netflix, stick to the simple story of a lone, crazy assassin? Because it's easier. Just as with JFK, where the lone gunman theory allows us to sidestep uncomfortable questions about larger forces at play, the madman theory of Garfield's death is a convenient story that lets everyone off the hook. It lets us forget two really uncomfortable truths. First, that a president was murdered because the political system was so corrupt it inspired a delusional man to kill for a government job. Guiteau's madness wasn't random. It was a product of the toxic, polarized politics of his era, an echo of the dangers we are warned about in our own divided time. He was a monster of the spoils system's making. The second truth is that the president was then killed by the ignorance and arrogance of a medical community that held to old truths as science, despite evidence to the contrary. But the real story is that Garfield's death was the shock that forced change. Here's the wildest part. His successor, the stalwart Vice President Chester A. Arthur, was so horrified that he turned on his own party bosses and championed the very cause Garfield died for. In 1883, President Arthur signed the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act into law. This was the bill that dismantled the spoils system and created a professional civil service where federal jobs are awarded based on merit. It was born directly from this tragedy, a memorial to the president whose murder exposed the rot in American politics. Netflix can show you the drama of a gunshot, but they struggle to show the whole truth. The weapon that killed President Garfield wasn't just the pistol in Guiteau's hand. It was the corrupt political system that put the idea in his head, and the deadly ignorance that finished the job. Garfield's story isn't just a tale of a madman. It's a warning about how the hidden wars in our political systems can have very public and very tragic consequences. So what do you think? Does popular history oversimplify these kinds of events just to make them more entertaining? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to dig up more hidden truths from U.S. history, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. This is Factual America, signing off.